again, the other vets practice here, I know I won't show it to you, but they emphasize the fact that they're not, that, and I think it was something that Neve mentioned this morning, that they're not a chain, they're not part of a big corporate chain. So they emphasize the fact that, again, it's personal service and they've been there for generations, and that they're trying to you know, sort of embed that's part of their culture. What do you think, just in general, of this idea of having a mission statement with, you know, or having a page on your website where you've got your vision and your mission and your goals and your values? Do you think it's a good idea for creating the culture that you want in the organization?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
Yeah, if it's not just put there, I suppose, for customers to read and pick you, like, I suppose you have to implement it then afterwards.
Yes, yeah, it has to be something you believe in. The temptation is to, you know, to sit down and maybe get your thesaurus out and put in a bit of, you know, flowery language and make it sound good, and it can turn it. The danger is it can turn into a bit of a marketing exercise, that it looks good and it might read well, but as we said this morning, if I'm the client and I walk into the practice and I immediately, you know, pick up a vibe from the staff, or I pick up you know, the place, it gives me off a different kind of feeling to what I was expecting, well, then it's a bit pointless. Like, it should reflect what is the reality of what the practice is trying to achieve. And then, as we've spoken about as well this morning, that the having an overall practice kind of mission statement and statement of values is good, but you also want to make sure that all the micro cultures, that, you know, that they're aligned with that as well, that, you know, that there's so that there's this consistency you know, along the way, or that a particular, or what the danger, I think, if you're the leader or you're the manager, what you need to be aware of as well, that it's great having this lovely set of values and your mission statement, and you know, and people have bought into it, but you want to make sure that you know, maybe a group or a microculture in your organization doesn't feel as though they're left out, or that they can't, you know, that they can't align with it, you know, like the realities of what they're doing don't, you know, align with what's happening with the rest of the mission. I've mentioned this lady a few times, this article a few times, Wendy Hauser's article. She outlines the elements that should form the foundations of a positive culture in a veterinary practice. And I liked this article because she really focused in on the, you know, just the way that people interact with each other. Like, a lot of the stuff that you see in the mission statements are nice sentiments, and they, you know, they're quite aspirational, but her approach here is that, well, it's, yes, you know, it's all right having these things in your mission statement, but what's the day-to-day reality like for people that are working in the practice? And when you look at, and it wasn't just in her article, but if you look at other articles that have been written, you know, things like a poor communications, or a blame culture, or something like that, can be very, very toxic and very, very detrimental to you know, parts of a practice, or even the whole practice. So what she's trying to address is, you know, can you put something in place, or what elements can you put in place, or should you focus on, to ensure that doesn't happen, that you can create the foundations of a good positive culture in your organization. And she outlines 3 different elements, and she said the first one is a thing called psychological safety. You may have come across this already, but a lady called Amy Edmondson from Harvard she's one of the big proponents of it. I'm going to show you a very short video of hers now in a minute, but Hauser defines physical safety as the shared belief by team members that the group is safe for interpersonal risk taking. And risk taking, you know, it doesn't mean like doing things that are dangerous, but it just means that you know, that people feel safe to share with, you know, basically to share with each other. And again, Amy Edmondson says it's a belief that no one will be punished or humiliated for speaking up with ideas, questions, concerns, or mistakes. And again, the reason that that's worth noting is because if you think back again to this idea of the authentic leader that we talked about, one of the the four characteristics of the authentic leader is that it's somebody who is willing to let every member of the team have their say, and to be willing, that doesn't mean that you agree with them, but you're willing to let people have their say, and you're also willing to hear opinions that maybe aren't favorable in terms of what you want to do, and you're also willing to give constructive criticism and take constructive criticism from your team. So that's a very difficult thing to do. So creating this air of air is the wrong word, but creating this atmosphere of psychological safety is very important. I want to show you a short video from the lady herself, and where she just explains it. So again, I'll stop the share for a second.
Just as I've never heard it coined that, but it does make sense that, if you're in an environment where you can talk about things without fear of judgment or just being completely wrote off, yeah, you can see how it would be beneficial to you and to your colleagues and to the practice itself.
Yeah, it's a kind of a concept that comes up a lot in team working. It's called, different people say different things, but it is something that it takes a bit of courage, for people in a team to buy into it, because if a team has been established for a very long time and it's not part of the culture, it's very hard to change it and maybe bring something like that in. But again, the idea of having an environment where everybody feels kind of psychologically safe is, logically, like if you just look at it intellectually, it looks like a very, very, logical thing to do, but actually making it happen can be more challenging than that. But again, Amy Emerson, she speaks, she does a lot in the area of human medicine as well, and care. And again, that I think that's where, it obviously was something that was seen as a major issue for lots of kind of healthcare providers, that again, the people in the teams didn't feel comfortable kind of, talking about things, and they lack this kind of idea of the psychological safety. Has anybody else got any thoughts on it, or have you come across that before? No. Well, excuse me. One of the things that Hauser suggests in her article is that if you believe in this idea of psychological safety, and she would definitely be advocating that it should be part of the bedrock of what your culture is in a veterinary practice, that you have to reinforce it. That people have to buy into the idea of it, and then you have to find ways of reinforcing it. And one of the things that she said was that's used again in the general caring profession is this idea of it's just an acronym, the Centre model, for pretty much just setting the parameters for what's meant by psychological safety. That when the group is talking, that there's confidentiality. What's said in the group stays in the group. That people get equal airtime. Everybody has the right to participate in the conversation. That there's non-judgmental, respectful listening. That people don't interrupt others when they're speaking. Timeliness. That it's done at times that respect other people's times and schedules. No good having a group meeting if it's always going to exclude one or two key people. That there should be a right to pass as well. Linked to the equal airtime, I suppose. That if you don't have something to say, that you shouldn't be forced to say. You shouldn't have to contribute to every conversation. especially if you need time to think over a particular issue. And then engagement, being fully present for the group and the conversation. Don't be, if you're going to go to a meeting, actually have an intention to make a contribution, that don't just go for the sake of, you know, of ticking the box and say I attended the group meeting. So this, and again, you can think of meetings you've been at. I'm when I was reading through that yesterday, I was reminded of maybe some of the group projects that maybe you had to do over the years. And like, you know, there have been times when you know, there was you know, some of those kind of points there could have been kind of not adhered to, you know, that you've been at meetings where there was maybe somebody turned up because they were told to be in the group, but they had, you know, they as she was saying, you know, as she was given the thing there being about it being in the apathy zone, you know, they were there, but they weren't really engaged, didn't really care what happened, to let everybody else do all the talking and the work. Or just even have a non-judgmental, respectful listening. You know, this idea, again, you've been at meetings where somebody makes a suggestion and somebody else just jumps down their throat automatically. It's almost like an instant reaction. So again, using again a small tool maybe, or just a small technique to maybe try and make sure that people get the chance to, you know, to feel as though that you know, to feel that they have that psychological safety. She said that's one kind of leg of the stool. Another leg of the stool is this idea of vulnerability based trust. And again, her focus, Hauser's focus here is completely on the team and creating this proper kind of mutually respectful kind of environment in the team. But she said, if you can get everybody to buy into and respect the idea of the psychological safety and have it actually there, then you should aim to build vulnerability based trust. And this is when people are comfortable to talk about things, you know, whether it could be things that went wrong, you know, maybe they can talk about mistakes they've made. Maybe they can give kind of what would you call it, constructive feedback. Maybe they can apologize to somebody about something that happened. But again, it's when you're, you know, willing to open up to the other people that are in your group. She said that this can be very difficult because people are naturally, I think people are naturally guarded. Lots of people are naturally guarded. So, you know, they're worried about kind of the emotional hurt that they might get by opening up to other people in their group. You know, maybe about a mistake they made. They might feel worried that they're going to be judged, you know, again, and that's natural. Or people might see them as being the weakest link, or that, you know, that they're not you know, they wouldn't be a valued member of the team. So again, it's a way for the group to approach this idea of, you know, listening and accepting and being willing to let people talk about things. And again, particularly, I think, I can't remember, it was Neve, I think, mentioned it this morning about when, you know, when there's awkward moments, you know, that, you know, this is, if you can create this kind of atmosphere, if you can have the psychological safety and the trust as well, that's when you can talk about these awkward moments. But, you know, if you don't have those kind of issue, if you don't have these two kind of components there, and one other one that I'm going to talk about, it's more difficult to talk about the awkward moments, because it becomes, people might become defensive, or they might, you know, they might engage with the whole situation. So again, this is all about trying to create a kind of a non-threatening atmosphere when you're in your team. The third thing then is she said, is to to try and get the team to buy into a set of common values that they believe kind of represent what the culture should be in the practice, or even the culture should be in their own microculture. You know, what are the things that will influence how we work together, and how we do our work, and how we work together. That's what she says. And again, I showed you some examples from websites about what the values for the practice are. And again, some of those you might, you know, take some of those, or you might even take some of the ideas that the BVA put forward in their principles for a you know, a practice with a healthy workplace culture. but she says that every organization, whether whether it's the whole organization, or maybe it's a subculture or a microculture in it, should be looking at, well, what are the key values that we hold true. And her way of trying to make that into something that's practical is it was to ask the question, what are the top 3 words you would use to describe the personality of your animal hospital? So, what are the things, that actually articulate what our value is? And again, that's a theme that comes up in other approaches to doing the same thing. So she, in her example, she says, pick the top 3 words that you'd use to describe the personality of your practice, and then combine them into a common term. Now, I didn't really agree with what she was saying here, like you're an educator or a teacher, but how would you describe what your shared values are? And then she said, pick the shared values that best describe the organization's identity, and again, see if everybody kind of buys into that. And again, if you're in a situation where you've got the psychological safety, you've got the trust, and then everybody is working towards the same shared values or holds the same shared values, then she reckons that that's a fantastic kind of foundation for ensuring that you've got a positive culture in your organization. She also says that if the practice kind of has these shared values, then they should be the principles that like management that should use when they're making strategic decisions, like what they're going to do with the practice in the future, or even when they're hiring staff. You want to hire people maybe who have similar shared values to the ones that the practice holds true, as opposed to just hiring somebody who's cheap or hiring somebody who's highly qualified or something like that. What do you think of that idea, folks? The the trust, the shared values, and the psychological safety. Do you think that that's something that's nice in theory but difficult to make happen in reality? No? Anybody?
Eamon, I think most of it can be, reality. Like,
Yeah.
Definitely letting everyone contribute and letting everyone be heard is easy enough, I think. Well, yeah, maybe.
I know what you mean, but it's again, maybe it's one of these things that it would be lovely if things weren't as busy and everybody could go away to a hotel for an afternoon and sit down and work on these things. Maybe even outside the the pressures and even the work environment. Sometimes people are more candid, and go back to the psychological safety thing. They're more willing to open up if they're kind of away from the even the environment that they work in all the time. There's different ways of doing this. One approach, again, an approach that she puts forward is this idea of using a thing called a culture map. And basically what it involves is it's a way of actually recording what you believe should be there, or trying to arrive at what you think the different elements of the culture should be, but moving from a point where you're just talking in terms of values that everybody buys into, to actually tangible things that can be done. So she says you start off by setting out what you think the outcomes should be in terms of what you want the culture of the organization, and in this case the practice, should be. And she said that you can look at it in terms of maybe what are the desirable outcomes and the undesirable outcomes, like and you're talking in terms of the way that people behave at work. So the undesirable ones could be like, well, we don't want people who aren't accountable, or people who are lazy, who only perform the minimum amount that's possible. What you're aiming for would be having staff who are fully engaged, staff who are innovative, staff who care about other staff members and care about the patients, who are committed to delivering a high level of care all the time. And again, also staff who feel as though they are valued by the owners of the practice or management and the clients as well. Oh, somebody's saying something there in the chat. Okay, Martin, sorry, your thing isn't working. That's okay. So that's one area. So she says, start off by looking at what the outcomes are, what the outcomes should be. Then think about, and this is where it gets a bit more tangible, really. Think about then what are the behaviors that would represent each of the two outcome scenarios. And I suppose I'm going to show you an example in a minute but it really focuses in on working towards the desirable outcomes. But I suppose the reason that she's highlighted both desirable and undesirable outcomes and behaviors is to maybe help you to be aware of what maybe undesirable behaviors and outcomes are, so that you can avoid them, or you can try and take steps in to change that in the culture. But again, some of the undesirable behaviors, finger pointing, taking a wait and see attitude, these are all her examples. Lack of enthusiasm, not showing up for work, quitting is pretty extreme, ignoring or denying that it was their job to complete a task. And again, you can see how that fits in with this whole idea of the psychological safety and the trust. You know, if people are engaged in finger pointing, well, that completely goes against the whole kind of the principles of the psychological safety and the trust. Whereas the more desirable outcomes, and again, this is not extensive by any means, consistently going above and beyond what's needed, willingness to ask for help. Again, she had laughter and smiles in there, being comfortable admitting mistakes. So again, going back to the safety and the trust thing, and then having an attitude of friendliness, caring, compassion. So these are all kind of desirable outcomes, and which lead on to the desirable behaviors. The final step then is to sit down and say, okay, I've worked out what the outcomes are that I want. I know what behaviors I'm trying to encourage or discourage. What do I need to put in place then to make these happen? And again, she talks then in terms of enablers and blockers. And she said there are certain things that, again, this is where the leadership thing comes into play, the leadership focus. If you're the leader, what can you do? You can put in, and there are a number of approaches you can take, but she says there are 4 categories of interventions really that will either help you achieve the culture that you want or inhibit it. And she says one thing that can be used is the incentives. And she said, like, things like financial and emotional rewards, they could be an enabler that might help you to achieve. Let's say we're focusing on the positive outcomes, that are there, because they might be things that would directly affect people's behavior. And she talks about things like flexible working schedules, given bonuses, appropriate wages, but also things like team celebration events, or heartfelt thank you at the end of the day. And as we said last week when we were talking about motivation, things like that can have definitely can have a big effect on people's motivation. The fact that you're thanked for the job that you do, or the fact that when the team when the team does something, that they actually celebrate their successes. We've all been hauled into meetings where things went bad, after something went badly wrong, or went wrong. But again, maybe just changing, maybe bringing in a new initiative where you just celebrate when the team does something well. I mean, it could be just that, something like that can that can make a difference to creating the culture, changing the culture. I noticed, I was chatting to one of my colleagues yesterday, and she said that she was dealing with some of her students that are on work placement in an accountancy firm. And one of the things that the accountancy firm does is, they brought everybody's working remotely, is that they all like to be on normal communications on a day-to-day basis, but once a week they organize sort of an event where where people can just kind of chill out and chat about things that are that are fun. and that they all got a day off on Valentine's Day as well. Everybody was told that, it was, and again, there was no particular reason for it. Well, obviously Valentine's Day was on a Sunday this year, so there would have been off anyway, now that I think of it. But they got a day in lieu of Valentine's Day anyway. And again, it was just doing something a bit different. It was a little incentive that just gave everybody a boost. And again, it helped to add to the culture of the organization in terms of just creating the bond with everybody that worked there. So again, you can give incentives. That's one thing. Another thing that can inhibit or can encourage people in terms of the culture is the kind of the rules and the way that things are done, maybe the hierarchy in the organization. Like, do they have a very strict hierarchy in terms of how decisions are made? She would make the point, Hauser makes the point that empowerment, what you should be aiming to do is to empower people as much as you possibly can. And we spoke about that a little bit last week. It's not always possible to do that, but look at ways that you can give people a bit of autonomy or responsibility, or even a say in issues that affect them, like in just in maybe scheduling, or in maybe even plans that the practice has for the future, or how it's organized, and actually do things that create a. Then another thing that she said is maybe create a psychologically safe workplace. Again, like bring in that center approach that we talked about a minute ago, just for team meetings, so that it doesn't turn into a one person dominating it and shouting everybody else down. Or not, it might be much more subtle than that. It could be just one person with a very kind of negative attitude that can just kind of change the mood of the whole place. She said as well that another enabler that would help would be to look at the people that are in the organization. It's hard to obviously fire people. If you've got a person who's particularly negative, you might say it'd be great to get rid of them. Like if you're running a football team, it's very easy. I've watched a program at the weekend where the manager was saying that I took over as manager of this football club, and there was a bit of a drinking culture, so I just got rid of the players, and one of them was even the captain, and that's great, and he got new people in. But you can't do that in most businesses. But as the business is moving forward, you can hire people who do share the organization's culture, the practices culture, and even do things as well that try and reinforce the shared values. And again, that can be through events, or just through promotion, or through the way that you organize things. And the fourth area, and again, this is one that kind of resonates with us in terms of what we're doing in this particular module, the leaders in the organization, they can be enablers or blockers, because the leaders, more often than not, they're sometimes called the climate makers in an organization, because the way that they do things can influence the people around them and the people underneath them. And she makes the point about this idea of mood contagion, that people catch feelings from others. And if the leader has a particular attitude, a positive attitude, buys into the principles we were talking about earlier on, well, that's something that other people will probably buy into, and they'll be more likely to adopt. Whereas if the leader has a negative approach, or is saying one thing and doing other things, well, that's going to be picked up on by the people in the organization. So the culture will never improve. It'll never become positive. She made this point that the laughter is the most contagious emotion. I'm not sure if that's really relevant to this, but I do, and it is something that comes true from lots of research and lots of literature and lots of case studies, that definitely the leaders, and the leader isn't just necessarily the person at the top who's the big boss. The leaders, particularly in the micro cultures, it could be, I'm not saying you wouldn't be the big boss, but maybe at the moment you could be the leader in your micro culture. Your attitude, your approach, the way you do things could set the tone for what other people do. So the leaders, in all of the different parts of the organization, are the ones who can make this happen, or can help make it happen. There's not. I thought there might be a few more people. So, but what we if you were going to do this, if you wanted to map this out, this is an idea of what one of these culture maps might look like. And I've put a copy of one up on Moodle. When it comes to doing your portfolio later on, I'm going to ask you to do one of these for an organization, for maybe the practice that you're in at the moment, or you can do for a practice that you were in the past if you prefer not to, to do anything that's too current. But this is what one of these culture maps looks like. Now there's different ways of doing it, but this is just using one particular template. But the idea would be that you'd start off with the outcomes. Now this was one for a business, some sort of marketing business, where they would talk about what their overall, what the outcomes were that they wanted: grow the market share, they wanted to have that valuation, and then they kind of broke them down into smaller bits. And then they went and talked about, well, what do we need to do in order to make that happen in terms of behaviors? Here's the outcomes we want to do. I kind of think it's some sort of a taxi company. Perception: Uber are good guys battling evil, government plus status quo. So, they talked about the things that they might do then to try and, create that outcome in their organization. And then they talked about the enablers and the blockers, and how they could do it. It's not a particularly brilliant example, but it might give you it might give you an idea of how you might do this. And if it weren't COVID world at the moment, this is the kind of thing that you would, everybody would go off to a hotel to do, like for part of an afternoon. And you could cynically say, well, some of it's a bit, it's like something that a manager and a consultant would get us to do, but it is something that if people are willing to buy into it, it could be very useful. And I think it's much better than getting the boss to write a vision statement and a mission statement and a set of values, because something like this can, if it comes from the people that are in the organization, it can be much more authentic, and it can be, again, it can be something that people could buy into. If somebody brings up an outcome and says, this is what I think we should do and this is the behavior we should have, if you can create, if you have that atmosphere of psychological safety and trust, it gives you a chance to discuss, well, what are our values, what do we really believe in, what should be the behavior, and what are the things that are blocking us, or what are the things that will make this happen. So this idea of creating the culture map could be very useful for a veterinary practice, or a version of it. I'm not saying that this is by any means the perfect way of doing it. Just as a matter of interest, what would you, if we were, I know we did mention it a little bit last week, but like if I was to ask you, like to go back and answer her question from a few slides ago, it probably seems like 2 hours ago, but what are the top 3 words you would use to describe the personality of your animal hospital or your veterinary practice if you were doing it? What are there any words to kind of jump out at you? I think Neve viewed something like I can't remember what it was last week, but it was something to do with clinical excellence, was it? Did you?
Yeah, clinical excellence. What else? I suppose, what way could you say it? Like always developing, like professional development within the culture, within the team, like it's team orientated. So like it's not really the done thing to go do things solo. It's all, the expectation is everybody works as a team.
Yeah, and exactly that. Yeah, exactly, and I think that's something that comes true from an awful lot of the what's written about the veterinary practices, that you really need, like, again, we were talking about maybe the focus, the VCI's focus might be a little bit outdated, but I think in the past there was maybe too much emphasis on kind of people doing things solo. Now it's very much team. Anybody else, anything else you'd add to that in terms of phrases that might describe the personality of your animal hospital or of your practice, but what you'd like it to be? Anything else? I might stick these onto the slides as well. No, maybe it's okay. We come back. So again, the this idea of the culture map, it might seem a bit forced, but it is worth. It's a nice way of making you focus in, because you're. And again, I was talking to somebody else yesterday as well, and I was just talking to them about this, and they were saying, "Oh my God, I'm reading again." Do you remember Habits? There's a guy called James Clean who brought out a book called Atomic Habits this year, and it's done very well for him. But this is basically his approach to changing habits. You know, he basically says, think about the outcomes, think about the what he calls it. He talks about like the person you want to be, but like what's the outcome? What do you want to do? And then think about what are the behaviors that you have to put in place to make that happen. And then think about the enablers and the blockers. He doesn't call them enablers and blockers, but the things that are that will stop you from doing that are the things that will help you to do that. So, you know, they're all kind of taking the same approach when it comes to this, but there's a logic to it. Last thing I wanted to talk to you about, though, can leaders change an organization's culture? What do you think the experts say?
I'd imagine that you would think that they would, like,
Yeah,
that they have a massive influence on what's the done thing, or anything like that, really.
yeah. It's funny. There's another video. I'll maybe ask you to watch yourselves. It's called the influence of leadership. It's the third one. It's not brilliant now. The third video in that series that we looked at, the one from the AHA this morning, and they were saying that leaders definitely have a huge role to play in changing the culture, or having an effect on the culture. That obviously you have to look at it kind of from different perspectives. On one hand, you've got the leader who is the leader with the big L, who's in charge, who's got the position, who's got a formal position of power, and they can make changes and they can do things and bring people in and change systems and change this, that, and the other. But then you've also got the leaders with the small L, who are the people maybe working in the micro cultures, who again maybe by the just the way that they do their job, or the way that they express themselves, and they bring other people in, can have a big effect on the culture. And again, there's lots of examples of organizations where the leader, maybe the organization was established for a long time and they brought in, they changed the person at the top, and the person who came in decided they wanted to change the culture, and for whatever reason it didn't work out, normally because it takes a bit of time. There's always a bit of a lag. The culture's been there for a while, and you coming in as a new leader, unless you're like the football manager who can go and sack half of your team and replace them with new people who will buy into what you want. But most organizations can't do that. So it can be a difficult thing to just change the approach overnight. But the leader has got this role to play, has got a key role to play. Most of the articles that you read, or many of the articles you read, would be talking about this. This is how you change the culture in an organization. Again, this was just on a website I happened upon. They said, first of all, define your mission, your purpose, define your company's culture in 5 words, which is kind of what we were doing there. Define your core values and infuse them into your day-to-day practice, and empower your employees to act upon the values and culture. There's nothing really wrong with that approach, except it's a little bit simplistic, though, because if you think back, I think the key to it is what we were talking about 10 or 15 minutes ago. This idea of having the foundations right, that all of those things there kind of imply that it's from the top down. And I don't know if any of you who had me back in second year might remember we talked about a guy called Ian Pownall from Australia, and he came up with this. I know he's a good way of describing culture there. The culture is the DNA of the business, or how a business looks and behaves. It encompasses how those working in a practice treat their clients, patients, each other, and how they offer their services. Mike Sinadian, sorry about that, Mike, got your name mixed up. But he comes up with this idea of how you can impose or how you can bring about the right culture. He says that the practice owner writes down the ideal culture. He talks about how himself and his wife did that in the places they ran in Australia. And then he said that you go and quiz the vets and the staff to determine what the current culture is, so that they can identify the areas that need improvement. So I suppose that's a little bit like the blockers and the enablers, looking at the things that are there that are causing you problems or that can potentially be improved. He says then create a culture document and explain it to all the staff and the vet about this desired culture for the business, and then tie in basically again enablers. If you think about the incentives, make staff compensations and HR decisions based in part on positive cultural activities, and then measure it. Measure whether the clients are happy with that over a period of time, to evaluate the success of your culture. I do remember I was really excited when I found that article first, because I used it actually as part of client. It was probably as part of client care now that I think of it, not office practice. But the more I kind of read it, the more kind of uncomfortable I felt about it, because it seems to be very much taking the view that the owner, the manager, the leader is completely right. And while, the owner, the manager, the leader definitely does have a big role to play, this approach kind of is very, very, very much top down. That it's presuming that the person writing the document at the top of, at the beginning, has all the answers. If you look at other research that's been carried out, the idea would be that it's important to get the input from everybody in the organization, or to try and find out whether there is different kind of microcultures within your organization, and whether the needs of each of them are being looked at. It might be impossible to keep everybody happy, but doing something like that can be more beneficial than getting the boss to write this document that maybe other people might feel as though is being imposed on them, and it doesn't in any way. This approach doesn't address those issues that we were talking about. He talks about trying to find out where the current shortcomings are, but it doesn't really kind of go to the heart of how do you address those shortcomings, or whether the replacements that you're putting in there for the shortcomings are actually going to do the job for you. Whether or not culture and leadership are things that are, or sorry, whether or not the leader can completely change the culture. I mentioned Groesberg earlier on today. Do you remember he was the guy with his team that did this analysis of, what is a culture and what are the different types of culture that you find in organizations? He said that culture and leadership are inextricably linked. Apologies for reading this. Founders and influential leaders often set new cultures in motion and imprint values and assumptions that persist for decades. If you remember last week, there was a video about purpose. Do you remember there was a video from a guy called Simon Sinek, and he was talking about purpose? And you'll find, particularly in young businesses or businesses that have been set up maybe by an entrepreneur or a dynamic team, that they had it has its own identity, and that identity kind of can survive for a certain period of time, but then somebody new might come in and they might try and change it, and that's where the problems kind of arise. Over these guys, though, Groesberg says, over time an organization's leaders can also shape culture through both conscious and unconscious actions. And the best leaders that they observed are fully aware of the multiple cultures within which they are embedded, and can sense when change is required, and can deftly influence the process. So I think he's actually getting to the nub of the problem here, that it's very difficult to change the culture overnight. That if you're the leader, maybe what you can do, maybe the approach that you have to take, and this is something that we can all work on, maybe even with our microcultures, is that if the culture isn't exactly as you'd like it or it should be, you're probably wasting your time trying to change it completely in one go. The best you can do is, or a good approach is to try and shift people's behaviors, over a period of time. That's the way that you can do it, rather than trying to come in and completely change the whole thing overnight. Because if the culture has been there for a long period of time, it's going to be difficult to completely do a 180-degree turnaround on it, or even move it quite significantly. So again, that's what makes leadership difficult. That even though you'd love to change things overnight, it can take a period of time, and that's where your leadership skills and we probably talk about your leadership style and skills a bit more next week and the week after. That's where you kind of can use those things to maybe influence your team, and gradually push them along to where you want them to be, as opposed to trying to go out and a revolutionary approach where you change everything all in one go, a big bang approach. Last couple of slides. The guy in the corner is Dr. Edgar Schein, who has written lots of things about culture. I saw him being credited with inventing the term culture at one stage, but in terms of a business organization, although I don't think that's true. But he's very, very eminent in the whole area of leadership, and he talks about this whole idea of the leader's role in changing culture. In an article, I've put it up on Moodle again if you wanted to have a quick read of it. It's not very long, but again, and apologies again for reading this, but he makes some very good points. Many managers mistakenly believe that they can arbitrarily decide whether or not you will have a good culture. They still don't understand that culture is a product of years of learning and experience, not something that you implement. You can find companies whose culture helps them perform, but they acquired that culture over a period of years through leadership that worked. So again, Neve's point, I think the leadership can have an effect on culture. So you can find it in those same companies a drop in performance, as the very culture that made the company successful became a liability when changes occurred in technology and in the markets. Okay, he's talking about kind of in the business world, but if you find that your business environment, or the environment in the profession is changing, then if you're the leader in a practice, what worked for you over the last 10 years mightn't work over the next 10 years, or even the next 3 years, if there's been radical changes, or even significant changes. It don't have to be completely radical, but that's where the leader has a fantastically important role to play. They have to be nudging the culture along to make sure that the culture is fit for purpose, dealing with the particular type of environment that it's facing at the moment. Again, I already had that slide in. Yeah. So he so this is the one that should be in here. So he went on to say, in mature companies, the culture will reflect the past history of founders and leaders and will limit what kind of leadership is possible. He said there will be a conflict between what new leaders try to impose and what the culture will allow. The leader will win in such conflicts only by hiring large numbers of behaviors of the old culture. So as you all sit there as leaders or potential leaders, you have to bear that in mind, that you might be sitting there and you might do the culture map up and you can see, God, this, we need to change things. Or imagine you got a job in the VCI, or you'd love to go in and change things, but if you're a leader, you're going to have to be more kind of subtle and progressive about it. Schein says the new leaders can start by imposing new values and behavior patterns, but this is not a new culture until it succeeds for a number of years and becomes internalized by the employees. So you can talk about destroying an old culture, but you cannot create or impose a new culture. You can only bring in new values and behavior patterns. So that's really, I think, it is the nub. And again, that comes across in other articles that have been written about this and other research that's been carried out into it, that the leader can't change the culture overnight, but what you can try and do is just get new values, try and get your team to adopt new values and new behavior patterns that will eventually move them into the culture that you want. Now, when I say eventually, you're hoping that it's not going to be like after you're dead, but it'll happen over a period of time, within a reasonable amount of time that'll get you where you want to be. So that's really what culture, the whole leadership and culture interaction, what the current research says on it, that yes, it's a bit simplistic to think that you can go in as the leader and change things overnight. You've got to you've got to be aware of everything about your team, and you've got to understand what the current culture is, but you've also got to you need to have a clear idea of what you want the new culture to be, and then work on the values and the behaviors, and if you're the leader, put the correct enablers in place to help them to move in the direction you want them to move, or if there's things happening that you don't like, are there blockers that need to be removed, that again that you can have an influence over. So that's really where we're at with. That's all really I want to talk about in relation to culture. It's kind of one of those areas where there's loads of things being written about it. Actually, I would just point you in the direction of what's up on Moodle, if you don't mind for a second. I might just stop there and go back to Moodle. Any kind of thoughts, or does what your any reactions to what we've done in today's module? Does it kind of logically fit together?
Yeah, it does. Yeah, it makes sense.
But do you think it is implementable, though? What we're saying, that's, I suppose, is the big.
Yeah, I think positive change. Well, I'm thinking, maybe I'm just hopeful. Positive change is always implementable, but it just takes time.
Yeah.
And consistency as well. And it's probably just little things. Because certainly in my experience, if you're trying to change anything, or you're part of something that's being changed, you will get pushback, not necessarily negative, just people trying to adjust to the new things. People do naturally kind of resist it. But when you see, if it's positive, like I was saying, if it's positive and people can see the benefits over a longer term, generally seems to stick.
Yeah. It reminds me a bit like about the habits thing as well. It's sometimes it's the small gains, it's the small wins, and you don't think you're moving very far, but if you've been, you look at where you are in 6 months' time, and suddenly, God, we've managed to get rid of that particular. No, we've managed to implement the center approach now for our group meetings, and everybody seems to, or team meetings, people seem to be happier about that, or we've got people to buy into a particular value. So again, that I think hopefully that's helpful now. So just to show you what's up on Moodle at the moment in relation to this, there's the notes from the obviously the PowerPoint, and there's a few of the videos that we used in class, and some of the articles as well that I referred to, and then that whole the AAA, AA, they call themselves AHA Cultural Initiative, which is actually very, very useful, worth having a look at. Examples of mission statements, and then down here, if you wanted to see the culture map, there's a version. You can download a culture map. There's also the BVA document I was talking to, which is it's interesting reading. As I said, they had a bit on culture, but they address lots of other things. And then this was referred to the skills2care.org. Again, it's an organization that's it seems to be geared towards people in the UK working in care homes, but in the whole care profession. But it addresses many of the same kind of issues that you might encounter in from veterinary in terms of it, kind of the team, the culture, to trying to create a culture of kind of mutual respect and understanding and openness and everything like that. So again, there's a bit of reading and viewing there if you felt like delving into this a bit more. Any questions in general about what we're doing? Like, I know your project is due next due the end of the week. So